Most of the punishments in Greek myth are earned. A man lies or murders or dares to set himself above the gods, and the gods answer with something terrible. But the story of Actaeon is different, and that is exactly why it has haunted people for so long. Actaeon did nothing wrong. He committed no crime, told no lie, insulted no one. He was simply a young man out hunting on a hot afternoon, and he turned down the wrong path at the wrong moment, and for that, and only that, he was destroyed in one of the most horrifying ways the old stories ever describe. He was turned into a stag and torn to pieces by his own hunting hounds, the dogs he had raised and loved, who no longer knew his face. How does a man end up devoured by the very animals that adored him, punished for a crime he never committed? That is the question at the heart of this story. So tonight you'll hear the real tale of Actaeon, the finest young hunter in Greece, the single accidental glance that doomed him, and the long, terrible afternoon on the mountain when his own pack ran him down. If you enjoy these, take a moment to subscribe. It truly keeps this channel going, and tell me in the comments which myth you'd like to hear next. Now settle in, and let's climb up onto the mountain where it happened. Actaeon was a prince of Thebes, the grandson of Cadmus, the hero who had founded that great city out of nothing. He was born into one of the proudest families in all of Greece. But it was not his bloodline that made his name. It was his skill in the wild. From the time he was a boy, Actaeon had been trained in the art of the hunt by Chiron, the wise centaur who taught the greatest heroes of the age, and under that teaching he grew into something remarkable. No one read the forest the way Actaeon could. He knew the tracks of every animal, the turning of the wind, the very hour when the deer came down to drink. And above all, he had his hounds, a great pack of hunting dogs, dozens of them, each one known to him by name, each one raised from a pup by his own hand. They were his pride and his companions, swift and loyal and devoted to him completely. Together they were the finest hunting team in the land, and on the slopes of Mount Cithaeron, the wooded mountain above Thebes, Actaeon was as close to a king of the wild as a young man could be. There was nothing cruel in him, nothing arrogant. He was simply very good at the one thing he loved most. And that, in the world of the Greek gods, would turn out to be no protection at all. It happened at the very height of summer, on a day when the sun stood directly overhead and the heat lay heavy on the mountain. Actaeon and his companions had been hunting since dawn, and by midday their nets were full and the ground shimmered warm beneath them. Pleased with the morning's work, Actaeon called out to his friends and told them to rest. There was no sense in hunting through the worst heat of the day, he said. They would lie in the shade until the cool of evening and then begin again. The other hunters settled gratefully into the shadows. But Actaeon, restless as ever, decided to wander a little further on his own, deeper into a part of the forest he did not know well. He carried no plan and no purpose. He simply walked, following the cool green light beneath the trees, letting his feet take him wherever they would. And without meaning to, without any way of knowing what lay ahead of him, he was walking straight toward a place no mortal man was ever meant to find. Deep in the woods of Cithaeron there was a hidden valley, thick with pine and cypress, and at its heart a secret grotto where a clear spring rose from the rock and gathered into a still, cold pool. It was a sacred place, and it belonged to a goddess. The valley was called Gargophi, and it was the favorite retreat of Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, the wild, untamed daughter of Zeus, who roamed the mountains with her band of nymphs and answered to no man. Artemis was a virgin goddess, fierce in her independence, and she guarded her privacy above all things. On that scorching afternoon, she had come down to the grotto to bathe, as she often did, weary from her own hunting. Her nymphs had taken her bow and her arrows and her sandals, and the goddess had stepped down into the cool water of the pool, deep in a place she believed no one could ever reach. And it was at that exact moment that Actaeon, parting the branches as he wandered, stepped without warning into the clearing. He had not been searching for anything. He had heard no voices and suspected nothing. One moment he was walking through the trees, and the next he was standing at the very edge of the sacred pool, having stumbled into the presence of the goddess and her startled attendants. The nymphs saw him first and cried out, rushing to surround their mistress and hide her from view. But it was already too late. Actaeon had seen what no mortal was ever permitted to see. And Artemis, rising from the water in fury, fixed her terrible gaze on the young man frozen at the edge of her grove. What happened next happened fast. Artemis had no bow within reach. Her weapons lay with the nymphs on the bank, but a goddess does not need a bow. In her rage and her shame at being seen, she reached down, scooped up a handful of the cold spring water, and flung it into Actaeon's face. As the droplet struck him, she spoke a curse, and her words were as cold as the water itself. "Now go," she told him. "Go and tell the world that you saw the goddess Artemis unclothed, if you can find the voice to tell it." There was a dreadful meaning hidden inside those words, though Actaeon did not yet understand it. He would not be able to tell anyone what he had seen, because in the space of a few heartbeats, he would no longer be able to speak at all. The old storytellers are careful to make one thing clear here, and it is the thing that makes this myth so deeply unsettling. Actaeon had not sinned. He had not crept into the grove on purpose, had not spied on the goddess out of lust or pride. It was an accident, pure and simple, a wrong turn on a hot afternoon. But the gods of these stories do not weigh intentions. Artemis had been seen, her sacred privacy broken, and someone would have to pay for it, guilty or not. The water ran down Actaeon's face, and the change began. It started at his head. Where the water had touched him, Actaeon felt his brow begin to grow, the bone pushing upward and outward, branching and hardening into the tall antlers of a full-grown stag. His neck stretched long. His ears narrowed to points and shifted up the sides of his head. The smooth skin of his arms and legs roughened and darkened into a hide of dappled brown, and his hands and feet drew together and hardened into hooves. In the space of a few moments, the young prince of Thebes was gone, and where he had stood, there was now a great wild stag, trembling at the edge of the pool. But the cruelest part of the curse was this: his body had changed, yet his mind had not. Inside the animal, Actaeon was still entirely himself. He thought as a man, remembered as a man, felt his rising terror as a man, trapped now behind the eyes of a beast, with no voice to cry out and no way to tell anyone who he truly was. He caught sight of his own reflection in the still water of the pool, the broad, antlered head looking back at him, and he tried to speak, tried to call out his own name. But all that came from his throat was a low animal groan. And then, far off through the trees, he heard a sound that turned his new blood to ice, the distant baying of hounds. His hounds. They had caught a scent. For a single frozen instant, Actaeon did not run. These were his own dogs, after all, the pack he had raised and fed and loved, every one of them known to him by name. Surely some part of him hoped, surely they would know him too. But a hound knows its master by sight and by scent, and the creature standing at the edge of the pool neither looked nor smelled like the man they loved. It looked and smelled like the very thing they had been bred and trained their whole lives to chase. The first dog lifted its head, fixed on the stag, and gave the long, eager cry of a hunt begun, and the whole pack answered as one. Dozens of hounds came pouring through the trees toward him, and in that moment, Actaeon did the only thing his new body knew how to do. He ran. He fled through the very forest he had hunted in all his life, crashing through the undergrowth on legs he did not yet know how to use, and behind him came the sound he had heard 1,000 times from the other side, the music of the chase, the baying of the pack closing on its quarry. Only now he was the quarry. He ran until his sides heaved and his legs burned, leaping streams and tearing through thickets, and still the hounds came on, tireless and joyful, doing exactly what he had spent his whole life teaching them to do so well. He could not outrun them. No stag ever does. On a steep slope of the mountain, the lead hounds finally closed the distance, and they brought him down the way they had been trained to bring down any deer. The old poets describe his death with a restraint that makes it worse, not better. Surrounded, exhausted, unable to run another step, Actaeon sank to the ground beneath his own pack, and he tried, one last time, to make them understand. He could not say their names, though he knew every one of them. He could only lift his great antlered head and groan, a sound that was not quite an animal's and not quite a man's, his eyes pleading with the dogs he had loved. And they did not understand. To them, this was only the end of a good hunt, the very moment they had been bred for, and they held their quarry fast and waited for their master to arrive and praise them. That was perhaps the most terrible detail of all. Somewhere else on the mountain, Actaeon's hunting companions heard the pack giving tongue over a kill, and they called out cheerfully for Actaeon to come and see the fine stag his dogs had taken, not knowing that the stag was Actaeon and that he was already gone. The hounds, when it was over, ran whining through the woods, searching for the master who would never come, unable to understand why he did not appear to call them home. And so the finest young hunter in Greece died as the prey of his own beloved hounds, on a mountain he knew better than anyone alive, for the crime of taking a wrong turn on a hot afternoon. That is what makes the story of Actaeon linger long after it is told. There is no neat lesson in it, or, if there is, it is a hard and frightening one. Actaeon was not punished because he was wicked. He was punished because he was unlucky, because he stumbled into the presence of a power far greater than himself at the worst possible moment, and that power did not care in the slightest whether he had meant any harm. To the Greeks, this was simply the truth about their gods. They were beautiful and terrible and utterly beyond appeal, and standing too close to one of them could destroy you whether you deserved it or not. There is something almost unbearably human in Actaeon's last moments, trapped inside a shape that hid him, surrounded by the creatures he trusted most, unable to make himself known. Nearly everyone has felt, in some smaller way, that particular horror of not being recognized, of crying out and not being heard. Perhaps that is why this oldest of stories still finds us, 3,000 years later. If this is the kind of story you want more of, take a moment to subscribe and tell me in the comments which myth I should tell next. Sleep well.